We're learning the second Sikha on Parshas Pinchas in Chelek Chavches on page 182. The shir today is being learned to Lenishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. In Pasuk Tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'amarta aleim es karboni lachmi li ishai reach nichoichi tishmeru lahakriv li b'mayadei. The Pasuk in this week's Parsha, which is the opening Pasuk beginning the Parsha of Karbonis, where the Torah will discuss all the Karbonis that are brought in the Beis HaMikdash on a daily basis, then on Shabbos, on Rosh Chodesh, and on Yom Tov. So the Pasuk says that command the Yidden to bring the carbon, and Tishmeru lahakriv li b'mayadei. It should be kept and be brought in its designated time. Stellt sich Rashi auf dem Wort b'mayadei, so Rashi quotes from the Pasuk the word b'mayadei. Und is mefarish b'chol yoim hu mayad atmidim. Every day is the designated time for the carbon tamid to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash, which was the carbon on a daily basis that was brought once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Darf man verstehen? So the question here is, was is Rashi meisif? If dem was da steht beferish, take it from the Pasuk shel yachriza. What is Rashi adding to what it says clearly spelled out in the Pasuk right after this? Dorten steht Shnayim layoim oila samid. Twice a day, the carbon oila is brought on a consistent basis. As the zman hakravis hatmidim is tamid, the time for bringing the tamid is b'chol yoim, every day and twice a day. Is tzilivas darf das Rashi mefarish sein in dem ersten Pasuk auf dem Wort b'mayadeh. So why does Rashi have to explain this idea that the b'mayadeh is saying that every day you bring the carbon of the tmidim, morning and afternoon? The Ra'am explains, as Rashi in Kupnit Zagin, as das is a mitzvah and a heges b'chol yom. Rashi is not coming to simply say that this is a mitzvah that's daily. Because that, the Torah itself spells out afterwards. Nor, hochi pirusha. This is what Rashi is saying. As jeden Tag is there's manat midim. Every day you have to bring the carbon tamid. Ve'ein shum meineya behem. And there's nothing that should prevent you of bringing the carbon. Even if there is tumah, they are impure, nevertheless, it has to be brought even in the time of impurity every single day. And that's what Rashi means by b'chol yom, regardless of the condition, even in tumah. However, to say that this is what Rashi's intention here is difficult to accept. Rashi hat geschrieben Pirushai euch faraben chamish lemikra. Rashi wrote his commentary that even a child, a 5-year-old, should understand what he means in his words. Heine beloshem brura euch farem. It's clear words, understood even by a child. And oi Rashi wollt gemein sagen as mizmakriv dit midim allemol afile betume. If that is the point of Rashi, to say that the word b'mayadeh is teaching that you bring it always, including in a time of impurity, wollte das gesagt befeidish. Then Rashi would have said this clearly. Al derech wie sagt in Parshas Ba'aleischa, legabe dem Wort b'mayadeh, welche steht beim Korban Pesach, as Rashi himself similarly says in Parshas Ba'aleischa, where there as well, the Torah says the word b'mayadeh in its designated time regarding the Korban Pesach, and Rashi explains af b'Shabbos, af b'tumah. The word b'mayadeh means that it has to be brought every time it's out of Pesach, even if it falls out in Shabbos, or even in a time of impurity, when most of Klal Yisrael is impure. So why does Rashi not say that clearly here? So it's clear. So it's pretty clear that this is not what Rashi means when he says the words b'chol yom hu mayad atmidim. Euch darf man verstehen. Additionally, what needs to be explained there is was taka is da Rashi nit mefarish b'mayadoi af b'Shabbos and af b'tumah. So why is it that Rashi does not explain that the word b'mayadeh here means, like he says in Parshas Ba'aleischa, that it should be brought daily, including Shabbos and including in a time of impurity? Regarding the fact that the carbon tamid is brought on Shabbos as well, so Rashi does not have to say that this is what's learned from this word b'mayadeh. Weil da steht befeidish weiter im Pasuk, because this is written explicitly in the Pasuk, Eilas Shabbos b'Shabbatoi al Eilas HaTamid, that it's brought every day, including Shabbos. However, it's still necessary to have a source to teach that the carbon is brought even in a time of impurity. So therefore the question remains, why would Rashi not explain b'mayadeh here, similar to what he says in Parshas Ba'aleischa, that it means tumah? The Even Ezra Taich b'mayadai. The Even Ezra explains this word b'mayadai as follows: Shalayiktemu kaidim habayka. It should not be brought on that day and every day before morning, and b'shalayachar achar erev. And it should not be brought too late in the day after the time in the afternoon when it's supposed to be brought. Well, if he says move on. Now, according to the Even Ezra's pshat and what b'mayadai is teaching, it's understood favas as daf shtein b'mayadai. Why it's necessary to add this word of b'mayadai. The pasuk itself later says that the carbon tamid is brought twice a day, and that one lamb is brought in the morning and one in the afternoon. But however, here the pasuk is coming to emphasize zmanoi hameduyik, that it has to be in its exact time, not before morning and not too late in the afternoon after the noontime, or after bein harabayim. That's what the pasuk is saying with this word b'mayadei. So now, the question is, so why does Rashi not explain the word b'mayadei here, like the Even Ezra says? It's understood why this word is necessary. It seems to be an explanation that is acceptable in understanding the simple words of the pasuk. So we have two questions here. Why would Rashi not explain b'mayadei like he does in Parshas Bahalaischa, that it comes to say that it's brought even in a time of Tumah? And why would Rashi not explain like the Even Ezra that it comes to tell you the exact time that it should be brought in the morning and in the afternoon? So to explain this, we can say as follows: The chiluk zwischen Pirish Rashi beParshas Seinu and Pirish Rashi in Parshas Bahalaischa is. So first, to explain the difference between what Rashi says here and what Rashi says in Bahalaischa regarding the same word b'mayadei. In Parshas Bahalaischa kommt Rashi mefarish in dem Yitur von dem Wort b'mayadei. In Parshas Bahalaischa, Rashi is explaining the word b'mayadei that is extra in the pasuk there. Warum? The pasuk is dort gleich mamshich zmanei hameduyik, because the pasuk there continues and says the exact time of when the carbon is brought, and that's bar ba'asar b'yoyim b'chodesh hazeh bein arbaim gomer. On the 14th of the month, on Erev Pesach, in the afternoon, that's when the carbon Pesach is brought. The Rebbe learned Rashi as the Yitto kum zu lassen heren anayim din. So since the word b'mayadei is completely extra, so it's coming to teach a new halacha, then that is that b'mayadei av b'Shabbos and b'mayadei av b'Tumah, that it's brought in its designated time, including if it's Shabbos and including it in a time of Tumah. That's a pshat in Bahalaischa. So Rashi is addressing an extra word which teaches a new halacha. By contrast here, when Rashi explains the word b'mayadei, is by Rashi Shver, the taich from the word b'mayadei. Here Rashi is addressing something else. The meaning of the word b'mayadei is not clear. Because the pashat taich from b'mayadei is, the simple meaning of the word b'mayadei is saying, in dem Zman, was es daruf bestimmt geworden. It's a designated time, a set time that was set for this. And wie Rashi taich l'mayed, as Rashi translates the word l'mayed earlier, l'oisei mayed hamiyuit shekavati l'chot, to that designated time that I've established for you. So now, it becomes difficult to understand, how do we translate the word b'mayadei here? So if so, when it comes to the other karbanis that the Torah continues to speak about in the parsha here, that's brought on Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh or the other Yomim Tovim, karbanis is kumim mizman lizman. These are karbanis that are brought in specific times. Is moving elasha b'mayadei. So there, the word b'mayadei is understood. Jeder carbon is memakriv in dem kavodigen Tag was mat farim bestimmt, was is miyuchad loy. Every carbon is brought in that set time that has been established, and that's unique for this carbon, that's for this time. It's a carbon tamid. However, regarding the carbon tamid, was farim is nit ausgeteilt geworden, a spezielle Tag. There is no special or designated time for this carbon. Mizim makriv ständig. Tamid, this is a carbon that's brought constantly. Jeden Tag, on a daily basis. Ukishmai, carbon tamid, oilas tamid, or oila tamid. That's what the name says, that this is a carbon that has no time. It's every day. Pastach mit bei ihm zu sagen dem Loschen b'moyedai. So here the term b'moyedai that it says in the pasuk that there's a set time, a unique time, seemingly is not true. So that's really what Rashi is coming to address. It's not only that there's an extra word here b'moyedai, but what does b'moyedai even mean in this context when we're speaking about the carbon tamid that's brought daily? And now this explains why Rashi with the Pirish Even Ezra. Rashi does not explain that the word b'moyedai means, like the Even Ezra says, the exact time that it shouldn't be brought too early or too late in the day. Because according to the Even Ezra's pshat, the word b'moyedai is not coming to explain the time that's set for the carbon tamid to be brought. Rather, it's coming to limit that it should be brought in the exact time when it has to be brought. Meaning it really doesn't have a set time because it's brought daily. But in this time daily, it's coming to limit and say not too early and not too late. To be careful not to bring it too early before it's morning, and not to bring it too late in the afternoon. So for this, to say, to limit the exact time within the daily basis, on daily basis when it has to be brought, the word b'moyedai does not really express this. Das is nicht a moyed kavua. This idea that it shouldn't be brought too late or too early is not what the word b'moyedai means when it's coming to say the positive, that this is the set time. That ausgeteilt zman faren tamid, a certain unique and designated time for the carbon tamid. Naradin b'shayches ala karbonis. Rather, this is just an additional halacha, and which applies not only to the carbon tamid, it would apply by every carbon that has its set time. That once you know what the time is, then you have to add that it shouldn't be brought too early or too late, but the time is exact and it has to be brought only in that time frame. But the word b'moyedai doesn't really imply that. The word b'moyedai is coming to say, bring it in this set time. But the point is, here regarding the carbon tamid, we don't even understand what it means that there's a set time. There is no set time. An additional point, it's not logical to accept in the simple understanding of the pasuk like the pshat of the Even Ezra. Warum? Because if we would say the pshat that he says, Demolt vol b'moyedai gedarft gesagt werden, nachdem wie die Teire sagt dem Zman haklali v'haprati von akravosai. Where is the time for the Teire to come and add this limitation after it says what the time in general and in more specifically on a daily basis that the carbon has to be brought? And that is, as the Torah says afterwards, Shnayim layoim, oila samid, esakeves echat tasa b'boker, vesakeves hashen tasa bein arbaim, where the Torah spells out the general time that it's on a daily basis, and then the details that it's once in the morning and once in the afternoon. And then after you say the time, in general and more specifically twice a day, could you come and say the limitation, that it should be brought exactly in the right time in this time frame? Warum der b'moyedai is lepirushay nit ken bir in dem etzem zman. According to this pshat of the Even Ezra, b'moyedai is not coming to explain what the time itself is. Not a prat un hagbale in zmane hakloli de yoyim va'proti de boker ben arbaim. Rather, it's just a detail of a certain limitation regarding the time, the general time of every day, and the time in morning and afternoon. Not to bring it too early or too late. So the word b'moyedai should be coming after it gives the general and specific time when it is to be brought. Only then could you come and give the limitation to negate not to be brought too early or too late. Then was the Torah is maktim the word b'moyedai eider dem zman haklali. From the fact that the Torah writes the word b'moyedai even before it gives the general time. And definitely it's saying b'moyedai before it gives the details of the twice a day, morning and afternoon when it's brought. Is move on, so it's understood as der b'moyedai read in dem etzem zman seinem. That the word b'moyedai is coming to say something about the very time itself designated for the carbon that's even before you speak about the fact that it's brought on a daily basis and once in the morning and in the afternoon. The Rebbe is Rashi Mefarish. So this leads us to what Rashi actually says and explains. B'chol yoim hu moed atmidim. That every day is the designated time for the carbon tamid to be brought. As the pasuk da tutoif, or the pasuk da oif, anaya hagdara b'negei carbon tamid. The pasuk here is teaching us a new way of defining the timing of the carbon tamid that's brought on a daily basis. As Bepashtus learnt men, simply we would say, as was implied before, as carbon tamid is nid gleich zu alle karbonis hamoedim. The carbon tamid is not similar to the other karbonis that are brought for Yomim Tovim, but jeder eine von sie hat sein moed, sein zman kavua. Each carbon has its designated time that it's brought. Mashenkin tamid hat nit kein moed kavua. Carbon tamid does not have a set time. Mizim makriv tamid has to be brought constantly, jeden Tag, every day. Und the Rebbe wird angerufen Eile Tamid. Therefore, it's called an Eile Tamid because it has no time. That's what you would simply say. Zogt Rashi. So here Rashi teaches us. As mit b'moyedai, kommt the pasuk zagen, when the Torah adds the word b'moyedai, even before it talks about what the time is, so the pasuk is teaching, as the pirish is nitazai, that with the carbon tamid, it's not the case that it's a carbon brought constantly and therefore has no time frame. Not as b'chol yoim hu moed atmidim, that every day is the time for this carbon tamid to be brought. Jeder Tag is a moed, an ois geteilt zman for a krovas atomah shel yom zeh. Every day is a new day, and every day is a designated time for the carbon tamid to be brought on this day. Kol yom v'yom b'fnei atzmai is a bazunde moed zman for den tamid von dem Tag b'yomai. Every day is a new day, and therefore a unique time for this carbon tamid that's being brought today. It isn't just a general obligation of bringing the carbon daily, so there's no difference between today, tomorrow, or yesterday. No, every day is a new day, and every day is a designated time for the carbon tamid of this day. That's how the Torah is defining the timing of the carbon tamid that's brought daily. Now we understand what the B'moyedai is coming to teach. Even before the Torah gets into the details, that it's brought daily, and it's brought twice a day, it's coming to define, in essence, what the time of the carbon tamid is. Just like by Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tov, there's a designated time. Regarding this carbon, there's also a designated time when it's brought. Now, my nafgemina otan gedde from carbon tamid as b'chol yoim hu moed atmidim. What is the difference? How does this matter? That there is a designated time for the carbon tamid every day. Whether there is or isn't, the halacha remains the same. That is brought every day, twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. There must be some practical difference in the fact that every day is considered to be a designated time for this carbon tamid that's brought today. Is das moving by pashtus? So this is something which is simply understood. Weiter in der parsha, further on here in this parsha, benigay dem carbon from Shabbos. When it comes to the carbon of Shabbos, stellt sich Rashi of the Werte Oilas Shabbos b'Shabbatai. So Rashi quotes the words in the pasuk that the carbon Oila of Shabbos is brought on this Shabbos. On his Mefarish, and Rashi explains what the pasuk is teaching. V'loi Oilas Shabbos b'Shabbos acheres. The Oila of this Shabbos is not brought on a different Shabbos, which means Harei Shaloi Hikriv b'Shabbosu. If one did not bring the carbon Oila of Shabbos on this Shabbos, Shemeya ani yakrishtayim l'Shabbos haba. So I would think that you could learn from here that then you make this up by bringing two karbonis in the following Shabbos. One for this Shabbos and one for the previous Shabbos that he missed. Therefore the pasuk says that the oila of the Shabbos is brought on its Shabbos, which teaches that if the day passed, the carbon of that Shabbos is gone. It can't be made up for. That's the halacha regarding Shabbos. Now, the question is, V is the din b'negei tamid. What would be the halacha regarding a carbon tamid? See, by carbon tamid, yakriv shnaim l'yom haba, if on one day they missed bringing the carbon tamid, could you make it up by bringing the next day twice? Or should we apply the same rule like Shabbos, that if you missed one day, you can't bring a carbon tamid on the next day for the day before? So seemingly the answer to this is, as from Shabbos, from what it says by Shabbos, we learn that the same rule applies by all karbanos. as you see it in the words of Rashi, where Rashi says, Magid she'im ovar yoimai. So Rashi says that from here we have a source that teaches that if the day passes, now nitten ovar shabbatoi, the chayetze bezeh. Rashi does not say that if this Shabbos passed, bring it the next Shabbos. Was der mit is Magid, as by a carbon, im ovar yoimai, dem tog von jeden carbon, is batel karboni. So it seems like Rashi is saying that it's from here that we learn the general rule regarding all karbonis, that if the day of this carbon passes, so then you can't bring it on the following day or any other day. So therefore, there's no doubts about this. It's clear that we're learning it from the pasuk Oilas Shabbos v'Shabbatoi. So Zabeshveret to Zaganazoi. However, it's difficult to say that what it says there by the Oila of Shabbos is a source for all karbonis. Warum mit etliche psukim weiter from pasuk Zeis Oilas Chodesh b'Chodshei? Because a few psukim later, where it speaks about the carbon of Rish Chodesh, and it uses a similar term. This is the carbon for the Chodesh. Zogt Rashi, so there Rashi says again, She'im ova yoimai batel karbonai v'shuvein tashlumin. That if the day has passed and they didn't bring the carbon, it cannot be made up for. So the fact that Rashi says this again, so the fun is move on, as the limud from Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi is nit b'negei yadin carbon. That the rule that Rashi says regarding Shabbos is not a source to learn that the same applies by every carbon, as we see that you need a separate source regarding the Chodesh. So therefore the question still is, what would be the halacha regarding the carbon tamid? Furthermore, regarding the karbanis that are brought on Yom Tiv, there's also an extra pasuk to teach this. Frier in Parshas Emor, in Parshas Emor, where it speaks about karbanis that are brought on Yom Tiv, Taich Rashi, if the day has passed and the carbon wasn't brought, it cannot be made up for. As benigeya zum carbon tamid, sagt man nicht im avayomai batel karbonai. Deloy kechol karbonis anal. It would seem that if the Torah teaches this clearly by Shabbos, Rish Chodesh, and Yomim Tovim, all the categories of karbonis that there is in designated times of the year, and there is no pasuk to teach regarding a carbon tamid that if you missed one day that you can't bring the next day, but you could make up and bring the next day a second carbon tamid for the day before. However, according to what was explained, what does Rashi mean to say when Rashi says that b'chol yom there's a designated time for the carbon tamid of that day, as the din is oich by carbon tamid? So now it's understood that no, that this din, that if you miss the day, you cannot make up or bring the next day, applies by the carbon tamid as well. The bald as the geder from carbon tamid is kanal. Nid blois as men darf ständig b'chol yom makar seiner carbon, because since, as explained, how do we define this, that you bring the carbon tamid daily? It doesn't only mean that every day you have to bring a carbon, and there's really no unique designated time. No, rather, b'chol yom u'moyed atmidim. It's being brought daily, but every day is a unique time for this carbon to be brought today. Jeder Tag is a bazunda moyed. Every day is a separate time for itself. An eisgetiltes man, kavua umeyuet far akrovas hatomid the yom zeh. A new day, a new designated time for the carbon tamid of today. Is b'meila move on. So if so, it's automatically understood as oich oifen tamid is chal de klal as oib ova yoimoy. So we apply the same concept by the carbon tamid as well, that if the day has passed, because there is a unique day, meaning a unique designated time of the carbon tamid today, is batel karbonai. So now it's batel, and you can't bring it, you can't make it up on the next day. So that's the relevance of this, that Rashi says that carbon tamid that's brought on a daily basis, every day is a new day that requires a carbon tamid for this day. Okay, but now though, it comes out that there's a distinction between the carbon tamid and all the other karbonis. When it comes to the other karbonis, Shabbos, Rish Chodesh, Yom Tiv, the Torah writes a specific lashon, Oila Shabbos b'Shabbatoi, Oila Rish Chodesh b'Chodshei, and by Yom Tiv Dvayim b'Yoimai, to teach this concept that you can't make up on another day. By the carbon tamid though, it says b'Moyadoi, it has a designated time, and it doesn't add anything more to say that you can't make up the next day. We learn it just from this, that it says b'Moyadoi, that if it has a designated time, so tomorrow is not the time, and it can't be brought. So the question is, what's the reason for this difference? Why, by the other karbanis, do you need a special limud to teach that you can't make up? and why for carbon tamid is it understood without any limud. So the Rebbe explains from deswegen darf man nicht haben auf dem a limud miyuchad as euch bei tamid is der din as ava yoy mechula. Although we're saying that by other karbanis it's necessary to have a limud, but over here regarding the tamid it's not necessary to have a separate pasuk teaching this, that if the day has passed that you can't make it up. Avapi as Shabbos or Regalim zene doch sicher ausgeteilte Tag was mismakrev beim Carbon. By Shabbos and Yom Tov over there it's obvious that these are unique and special and separate days that requires the Carbon for that day. And Valfal Pekain darf man bei ze haben a pasuk v'limud biyuchad as a mavayim batal karbani. And over there we see it is still necessary to have a additional pasuk to teach that if the day has passed that you can't bring the Carbon. So what's the difference? This is faran achiluk ikri zwischen the karbanis from Shabbos chulu and carbon tamid. So it could be explained that there's a fundamental difference between the karbanis that are brought on Shabbos, Shchedish, and a Yom Tov, and the carbon that's brought daily, the carbon tamid. Even if we're saying that carbon tamid is also a unique requirement of this day, a mayid of this day, but there's still a big difference between them. The Eisgeteiltkeit legavi shaya meisa shana von Shabbos und Regalim. The fact that every Shabbos or every Yom Tov, there's something unique about this day, is nit mitzat hakravis hakarban shabam. What makes the day unique is not because of and as a result of the carbon that's being brought on this day. Na mitzat atzmam. These days are unique and special days on their own before the carbon that's brought on this day. Shabbos is a Yom Kaddish, on his Oster b'malacha. Shabbos is a holy day and forbidden to do any work on the day. Al derech zeh the Yom Tov, every Yom Tov is also a unique and special day that one may not do work on it, and it has unique mitzvahs in this day. Nor in the tag, kommen zu euch chiyuvim von bringen karbanis am yuchadim lahem. Additionally, after these days, we know that they are special. Before, there's an additional thing that now there are special karbanis that have to be brought on this day. But the fact that you bring these karbanos on this day is not what makes this day special. That's an added thing. On the far is lule dem limud miyuchad. And therefore, if not for the fact that there's a special pasuk that the Torah adds to teach that if you missed one day on Shabbos, you can't bring it on the next Shabbos. And similar by the Shchedish and Yom Tov, one would think to say, as man soll dem Carbon mashlim sein b'Shabbos haba, that the carbon could be made up on the following Shabbos, or Valderech Zebenegei Yom Tov, and similar regarding carbon is brought on Yom Tov. It's not a carbon that you could say that this is what's unique about this day, that it has a special carbon of this day. This day stands out anyways for being a Shabbos, a holy day. The carbon is an additional thing that has to be brought on this special day. So maybe it could be brought on another Shabbos if you missed this day. So here it's necessary to have a additional pasuk to teach that you can't make it up on another Shabbos. However, when it comes to the carbon tamid that's brought daily, is loy pirish Rashi as b'chol yom hu moed atmidim. When Rashi explains that every day is a unique time that requires the carbon tamid to be brought on this day, is the Eisgeteiltkeit von dem Tag. So what is unique about each day? Nor durich tzelieb dem carbon l'yom zeh. What makes this day unique, different than another day, is all through and for the sake of the carbon that's being brought today. Ubemela is poshit, so if that's the case, so then it's obvious as im over yoymai that if it's day of the carbon that's unique for the carbon of today, the tag was as eisgeteilt umiyud for dem tamid shel yom zeh, it's separate and unique for the carbon of today, is batal karbani. Your chance to bring the carbon is over. It cannot be brought tomorrow. Was is eisgeteilt bifnei atzmai for dem tamid di yoymai from the morgen. Since tomorrow's day is a new day that is unique in what sense? That it's designated for a carbon tamid of the next day. So over here, where each day, what's unique about the day, what separates it from another day, is this, that it has the carbon that's brought especially on this day. So over here, it's simple to understand that once the day is over, so now you can't make it up on the next day. And therefore here, Rashi says it's not necessary to have any additional limud to teach this halacha. That's the difference between the other karbanis, Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh, and the carbon tamid that's brought every day. So what we see here is not only did the Rebbe explain that carbon tamid also has a unique designated time, but in a way actually even stronger than Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh regarding the carbon. By Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh, what makes each day unique is not the carbon that's brought in this day, but by carbon tamid, the day is designated for this carbon, through this carbon, and for this carbon that's brought today. And therefore here, it's obvious that you can't make it up for the next day. Das ist aber noch nicht kein Bier maspik. However, this point is not yet enough to explain this last question that we're dealing with. Why only by Shabbos, Yom Tov, and Rosh Chodesh does it need a special limud, and by a carbon tamid we don't need a special carbon to teach that it can't be brought on another day? And the reason is as follows. This is mitstaver zu sagen. It's logical to say, as the erste pasuk from Parshas HaKarbanos, that this pasuk we're dealing with, which is the first pasuk of the entire Parshas HaKarbanos that comes and follows, that includes everything, the carbon tamid, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh. So it's logical to say that this pasuk where it says, Tzav es b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta aleim es karbani lachmi le'ishay rech nichayche tishmur lahakriv li b'mayadai. And in this pasuk it speaks about all karbanos that have to be brought in their time. It doesn't spell out one individual carbon here. Not the carbon tamid, not Shabbos, not Rosh Chodesh, not Yom Tov. Is a hakdama klolis to the alle karbanos was coming b'hemshach haparsha. This pasuk is a general introduction regarding all karbanos that is explained later in the parsha. Tmidin, Musafi Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Uregalim. All the karbanos mentioned. V'zei alle zen alachmi le'isha gomer. They're all the bread and the fire and the mizbeach. So in this pasuk, when it says that you should tell Yidden to bring this karbanis, hyped on the pasuk, the prate karbanis. Actually, in the following pasuk, after the pasuk of Tzav es b'nei Yisrael, then when it begins with V'amarta lahem zeh ha'isha, that begins detailing all the karbanis, specifically Yadarim b'fnei atzmei onei the carbon tamid, beginning the first, which is carbon tamid, and then Shabbos, then Rosh Chodesh, and so on. But the first pasuk, though, Tzav es b'nei Yisrael, is a pasuk that it seems is as a general introduction, speaking about all karbanos. Now, if that's the case, well, if hizek kumtais, as oich the word b'mayadai, gate of the alle karbanos. When it says here the word b'mayadai, it's referring to all karbanos. Wie the pasuk rechent weiter, die zmanim von jedem carbon, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Regalim. As the pasuk then elaborates and explains what the specific time of every carbon is on Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and the Yom Tovim. Now, the fact that Rashi points out in B'mayadai what it means regarding the Tamid, Rashi's Namavayer, Rashi comes to explain as Oich Bat Tamid is the Zelbe Pirish from B'mayadai, that we could apply the same meaning of the word B'mayadai, that there's a designated time, even by the carbon Tamid, Vibalt as B'chol Yoim Hu Mayadat Midim. Since every day is a unique time that requires a carbon tamid for this day, as explained before. So Rashi is coming to clarify that the word b'mayadai could be explained even regarding the carbon tamid, similar to the carbon on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and so on. So now, if that's the case, that really this pasuk is a pasuk that refers to all karbanos. Ubemelo move on, if so it's understood as the karbanos from Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, or Regalim, zen nitkin inyan neisef of the tag. The karbanos that are brought on each one of these special days is not an added feature to the day after we know that the day is unique and special, as mentioned before. Then there's another point that there's a carbon brought on this day. Nor the Eizgeteilkeit von die Tag is euch zu lieb the karbanos shalayim. Rather, what makes the day unique is also the fact that it has special karbanos brought today. The tags and the miyued v'karvua. These days are special and established for these karbanos that are brought especially for this day. So similar to what was said before regarding the carbon tamid, that what makes this day unique is the special requirement of the carbon for this day. So if that word b'mayadai refers to all karbanos, including Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tov, so the same applies to them as well. That the day, the very day, is unique and designated for the carbon of this day. So if so, v'hodra kushila duchta. Now the question comes back, v'vaz darf man alimud miyuchad b'negeya Shabbos v'Rosh Chodesh as im ava yoymai bottle karbonai. Why is it necessary to have a special source by Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh that if the day has passed, that you can't bring the carbon on the following day? If this is the day that requires the carbon of this day, and tomorrow is a new day that requires a new carbon, so it's understood you can't bring the carbon of the day before on the next day. That's a new day that requires its own carbon. And similar regarding a Shabbos. You can't bring from one Shabbos to the next Shabbos. Every day is a unique day that is designated specifically for the carbon of that Shabbos or that Rosh Chodesh. So why is it that regarding Tamid, there is no reason to bring any additional source that you can't bring it on the next day? But by Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and by Yom Tif, it is necessary to have an additional source for this. So to explain this, we can say as follows. Let's take a closer look and see the different expressions in the language of Rashi that we find when Rashi explains this. By Shabbos, schreibt Rashi in Arichas. Regarding Shabbos, when Rashi explains this, Rashi writes more in length. If one did not bring the carbon on this Shabbos, I would learn and think that you could bring twice another to make up on the following Shabbos. So the Torah says, to teach that if the day has passed, the opportunity for the carbon is over. That's by Shabbos. However, a few psukim later, by Rosh Chodesh, sagt Rashi bekitzer, by Rosh Chodesh Rashi says concisely, there is a certain addition in the words of Rashi here that he did not say by Shabbos. Shem ava yoimai batel karbonai. The day passes, the opportunity for the carbon is gone. Vishuv ein loy tashlumin, and it can't be made up for again. Frier. Then, if you go back earlier in Parshas Emor, like in Pasuk Dvar Yom B'Yoimai, where Rashi explains what the words Dvar Yom B'Yoimai means regarding Yom Tif, Zokt Rashi B'Kitzer Ubeli Hahisafa. Here Rashi says very in short and without adding the addition that he says by Rosh Chodesh, Ha im Ava Yoimai Batel Karbonai. If the day has passed, then the carbon is batel as well. So how do we understand the difference in the language of Rashi regarding these cases? Now, it's bishleime by Rosh Chodesh. It's understood regarding Rosh Chodesh. We bald as das kommt mit etliche psukim laachre pirushav b'shabbatay. Since Rashi is explaining this just a few psukim after he explained the word b'shabbatay, is move on. Why Rashi doesn't have to elaborate and write as he did before by Shabbos, because he just said it by Shabbos and it's understood that this is what he means here by Rosh Chodesh. Aber b'negei lekarbanis hamayedim b'parshas Emor. Rashi is explaining the words Dvar Yom B'Yoimai that's written earlier in Parshas Emor, and it's in another sefer, not in Chumash Bamidbar. Why does Rashi there write in very short? Why doesn't Rashi use a similar expression to the way Rashi writes it regarding Shabbos, since that's actually the first time where Rashi is addressing this? Rashi should have used the same kind of language that he says by Shabbos. So Mefarshim Zogin, the commentaries explain, as baragolim darf man et onkommen zu alimot she'ein mevi'en oilas yomtev b'yomtev acher. Rashi here does not use the expression that he says by Shabbos, that if I miss this Shabbos, I would think I could bring it the next Shabbos. Here, regarding a yomtev, Rashi can't say that. That if I would miss this yomtev, that I could bring it on a next yomtev. Varim says pshita, it's obvious, as im le'yekrive bePesach, shele'yekrive b'shvuas tashlumin lePesach, that if you did not bring the carbon on Pesach, you can't make up for this on Shvuas for the carbon of Pesach. Because afagav the shavim the carbon isayim, even if for the carbon musaf they are similar, the kamakim trei shemis nino. The identity of the yomtiv is different. Aval Shabbasis v'Rosh Chodesh the kulu chad shmaninu. But when it comes to Shabbos, one Shabbos and the next Shabbos, or one Rosh Chodesh and the next Rosh Chodesh, since it's the same identity of Shabbos or Rosh Chodesh, sal kedai tachaminetz over there would be a thought to say sheyakriv b'shvil tashlum yerishin, that it's possible to bring a carbon on the next Shabbos to make up for the Shabbos before. And Kamash Malon, and that's what the pasuk is teaching, that you don't have the ability to make up. So therefore, regarding Yontif, Rashi cannot say what he says by Shabbos, that you would bring on the next Yontif what you missed the Yontif before. So Lefizeh, so based on this, is the limo dvar yoim b'yoimai b'negei l'karbanos ha'regalim, when the pasuk does say that you should bring the carbon on its day. Regarding a yontif, what is it coming to say? Shailol di tashlumin von ein tag yontif in dem spätendigen tag in demselben yontif gufe. What it's coming to say is that you do not have the possibility to make up for a carbon of one day yontif to the next day yontif. If you didn't bring on the first day of Pesach, you can't bring the carbon musaf the next day Pesach for the day before. V'zayin yimei Pesach, whether 7 days of Pesach, or v'zayin yimei Sukkos, or in the 7 days of Sukkos. That's what it's coming to teach. So therefore Rashi just says, Im ava yoimoi batel karbonai, referring to that the first day that you can't bring on the next day. But Rashi cannot say, like he says by Shabbos, that you would bring on the next Yom Tov. That's what it says in the Mefarshim to explain Rashi's language here. Different than what he says by Shabbos. The Shaila is aber. However, the question remains, Favazom in the Tavim King Limud, as in loy hikriv b'Pesach zeh, yakriv shtayim b'Pesach haba. Rashi could still say, similar to what he says Shabbos, that if you did not bring the karbanis on this Pesach, you could make up for it maybe the following year, next Pesach. And similar regarding Shavuos, to make up next year's Shavuos. So why does Rashi not explain that the pasuk is coming to negate that possibility? So the answer to explain this is as follows. In dem Geder von Tashlumen, zenen da kama ifanim. When it comes to making up, rectifying something that was missed in the past, there are a few different options or opportunities of how you rectify. Umehem, and from these different options are as follows. Aleph, mitzadem gavra. Sometimes when you make up, it's the person to make up his obligation. He's coming to make up that obligation that he should have fulfilled on a day before. Or are there cases similar? But then there's another concept of making up. Mitzadam chefza. There's a certain object that has to be utilized, has to be made up for. Azach was mod gedarf tom mit a gewisse chefze. Something had to be done with a certain object. Tut das mit dem chefze bis man shalach rize. And you're now taking that object that was not used yet for what its designated purpose was, and you make up for it, and you do it now. So this is making up with the object itself. As an example for this, the alderech, somewhat similar to this, is the tashlumin mitzad mitzvah von v'heshev esagzela eshagazal. When it comes to a person paying for something that he stole, where the pasuk says that you have to return what you stole. Now, so here there's two different options. If the object that he stole is still in his possession, get that up the zachalein, so he has to return the object itself. On his mekayim, the heishev esagzela kepshutai, regarding the cheftza. He fulfills what it says in the pasuk to return the stolen object, literally, regarding the very object itself. Now, b'shas the mitzias is menet kayim. However, if he does not have the object in his possession, salted up the shivoy from the gzeile. So then you have to pay the value for this stolen object. On his mashlim den chiyov mitzvah vasliktefim gavra. And over here the person is paying and making up for the obligation that he has to return by paying the money. So that makes up for the obligation that lies on the person to return what he stole. Although the object is not here to return anymore, but the person is paying back the value of what he stole. That's an example for these two different types of tashlumin when a person is making up for something that was missed before. Similar could be applied when it comes to making up for a carbon that was missed. Since every carbon has its unique designated time, as the pasuk says, b'moedei, is move on as den kiyum hachiyuv hamitzvah von akravas carbon b'yom zeh, that to fulfill the obligation and the mitzvah of bringing the carbon on this designated day, kamenet mekayim zayin durch ein makriv zaynim in an undertog. It cannot be fulfilled by bringing this carbon on any other day, which is not its designated day when the obligation applies. Und das ist Rashi madgish b'negei l'tmidim, and this is what Rashi says when he speaks about the word b'moyed by the tmidim. As b'chol yoyim hu moyed atmidim. Every day is a designated time for this carbon. B'meile, so then it's obvious. Hat kein Artnit, as the kiyem mitzvos akrovas atmidim di yoyim zeh. Soll man mekayim sein, durchbringen ihm in a zweiten Tag. Was is nit mayedai. So it's impossible to fulfill that obligation that this day requires on a different day, when it's a new day, and that has its own obligation. That's what Rashi says here regarding the Tmidim. Al derech says, moving in again, ala karbanos shabe parsha seinu, and similar is understood and can be applied regarding all karbanos in our parsha. Was b'mayedai gate of zeir zman kavua liyom mesuyim. When it says b'mayedai, it includes also all the other karbanos that they have their unique designated time. The musfei Shabbos b'Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh regalim regarding Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh and the Yom Tovim. Sinitok ken kasol kedaitach. There's no room to think as b'shas mod falfelt zu makriv sein musaf Shabbos soll man mashlim sein die mitzvah v'chiv the yom zeh b'Shabbos haba chayetz b'zeh b'Rosh Chodesh regalim. How could you make up for a carbon that the obligation is specifically for this day that's designated, that you should bring it on a new day, which does not have that obligation at all, and has a new obligation for another day? So this idea that we see from the word b'mayedai regarding the carbon tamid, as far as the obligation of the person, the gavra, is concerned to bring it on this unique day, that's self-understood that you can't make up for this on another day regarding tamid, regarding Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov. There's no additional source needed for this. Now, the question, though, is, when it comes to Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Yom Tov, there is an additional limo that the Torah says that you don't make up for it on another day. What's the reason for this? Because the Shaila bleibt aber, because there's still another point there that you can ask, that maybe there's another requirement or another reason to make up for what wasn't brought on its day. Das is dort the mitzias from them carbon. Since the object, the animal, the carbon is still here. This lamb that was designated to be brought as a carbon on this day still exists. So let this lamb, which is here and designated for a carbon, be brought in the next day. Even if this will not be a makeup and to rectify the obligation of the person, but for the cheftzeh, for the object which is here, maybe it should be brought the next day. Well, derech zeh b'musaf Shabbos, and similar regarding the musaf on Shabbos. Soll man makriv sein b'Shabbos haba, die kvassen was dann gewen angegräht for den friedigen Shabbos. So if it was not brought on one Shabbos, it should then be brought on the following Shabbos. Bitzadem, was das is a keves, ham zumen for a tomid, oder for Shabbos. This is already the designation of this animal. This keves, which is designated for a tomid or for Shabbos, so what are we going to do with it now? So at least it should be made up for the cheftzah, for this object, that it should be brought on another day, on another Shabbos. Furthermore, the Rabbi says, even if that animal was not yet prepared and designated for the Tamid or for the Musaf of that Shabbos, since there is the money that's in the fund, that is special and designated for the carbon Tamid and Shabbos that has to be brought, whether daily or on every Shabbos. This is what was brought from the Machzas HaShekel that was collected of all of Klal Yisrael, and they had this fund for the Karbanis Tzibur of the entire year. So it should be used, that money in the funds that has already been designated for the carbon today, and it was missed, it was not used, take that money and don't let it go to waste. Use it on the next day or for the next Shabbos. Das is the Chiddush, and this is what the Torah comes and says, that if we did not bring a carbon one Shabbos, I would think to say that the next Shabbos bring two. The Kesol Kedait doch da is nit me so mashlim sein dem Chiyuv mitzvahs hakrovas musav Shabbos shalifneiza. The idea here was not that you can make up the obligation of that unique Shabbos and that unique day that you have to bring the carbon. No mitzad mitzias from the kvasim the carbon. Rather, the idea here is you have the object, you have the actual physical carbon here, or the geltle carbon, or the funds for the carbon. So that money which is here should not go for waste, and it should be used on the next Shabbos. That's what I would think logically to say. So if them learned up from b'Shabbatoi, so therefore we need an additional source where the Torah adds the word b'Shabbatoi to teach that magid shem over yoymoi bottle karbonei, that if the day has passed, then the carbon, Rashi uses this expression that the actual physical object, the carbon itself, is bottle. Says nitah the mitzias from them karbonei. When the day is over, so the designation of the carbon for that day also is gone. Nid blois is nit da the chiyuv mitzvah sakarbasai from Friedigen Shabbos, that not only since it's a new Shabbos or a new day, there is no mitzvah of the previous Shabbos that exists anymore. That's obvious. Nor b'shas as over yoimoy is nisbatl geworden dem korban Shabbosu. Once the day passes or the Shabbos passes, here we're talking about Shabbos, so then the entire designation of the korban of that Shabbos is gone. And therefore there's no makeup for this, even as far as the cheftze, the korban itself, is concerned. Und then lernt man up euch benegel rish chaydish for a golem. And this halacha, then the Torah comes and is mechadish that it applies also regarding Rish Chaydish and regarding Yom Tovim as well. That even if you have the physical korban or the funds for it, you do not use it on the following Rish Chaydish or Yom Tov for the korban. So now we come back to the Tamid. So by the korban Tamid, the Torah does not say this at all. So by contrast, when it comes to the korban Tamid, afal pi as b'chol yoyim hu moyed atmidim. So although Rashi already explains that the word b'mayadeh teaches that every day is a unique new day for the korban tamid of this day, is nidok and kesal kedaitoch as mezol mekayim zayin chiyuv tamid hayoyim mit zen akrava l'mocher. And therefore, as explained, there's no room to say that the obligation for today should be fulfilled tomorrow. V'balt as mocher is nit mayadeh, since the next day is not the designated time. That's obvious. Mahata benit ken limod as batal karbonai. However, this additional point regarding the cheftze, regarding the object, the physical korban itself that has not been brought yet, for this, regarding the korban tamid, there is no source to say that the korban that's in the object of the animal that's here, that's gone. As the mitzias a korban vet batal, that the very existence of this animal being defined as a korban should be gone after its time. There is no source by korban tamid. So therefore, learning the pasuk according to the simple pshat, it could be said as miken noch mer bedarf makriv zayin ditmidim lemocher, that you can and furthermore you must bring that korban tamid of the day before the next day. Since you have the physical animal or the funds of the korban that is here and that's available, and so therefore even if you can't make up for the obligation that you have of the day before for the gavre, but for the physical korban that's here, it does have to be brought on the next day. Therefore, korban tamid is unique and different than all the other korbanos. There is a makeup as far as the cheftze for the physical korban that has to be brought on the next day. Now, is moving with pashtus. Now, based on this explanation, it's simply understood as benegel at golem. When it comes to the Yom Tovim, so the question that Rebbe asked before, why does Rashi not explain why you can't make up from one Pesach to the next Pesach? Maybe we need a clarification for that. So now it's understood, is nito afile ken kasol kedaitoch. There's no room at all to even think as oibn is nit makriv be Pesach. That if you did not bring the korban Pesach and this Pesach, bring another korban Pesach, or not the korban Pesach, but the korbanos of the Yom Tov Pesach, and the following Pesach or the following Shavuos a year later. Why is this the reason? What's the reason why we would not think that this is an option at all? Warum die Shkolim von jedem Jahr, welche sind zu lieb kaufen korbanos Zibur shel kol shana v'shana. Because the whole point here was that since you have the funds of the korban of this Pesach that was not used, so you should bring it and make up for it to take those funds to use. But the thing is, the funds, which is the shkolim that they have, that is for the korban tzibur of every year, is new funds. It's a new machzas shekel that's collected for every year separately. As Rashi already explained this earlier, that nosnu kol echad machzas shekel vehem liknes mehem korbanos tzibur shel kol shana v'shana. The machzas shekel that the Yidden donated was for the korbanos tzibur of that year. Is nitok in svare, so therefore there is no room to say as mazal bring the korbanos from ein shana in a chag from the zweite shana. So if you missed the korbanos this year Pesach, so there's no room to say that even if the gavra can't make up for it, obviously the obligation can't be made up for, but you have the funds. So let's go back to the funds and use the machzas shekel to bring it next year Pesach for the previous year. But the thing is, the funds that are here today in this year is new funds designated for this year. Afil mitzad the mitzias a carbon. So even as far as the carbon itself, the object of the carbon or the funds of the carbon, nitna mitzad ashlame von b'chiyuv or mitzvah kanal. We're not dealing here with the make-up for the obligation of the mitzvah. That's obvious that you can make up. V'bal tishkolem shoshana zu haben kein shaychis nit to the karbonis of dmei karbonis shebishana shniya. Since the funds, the machzah shekel that there is for the karbonis in this year have nothing to do with the karbonis of the previous year. So even as far as the chefts is concerned, the funds that are here, it's not the same. And therefore, there's no need to clarify that you can't bring a carbon Pesach or the carbon for Yontif Pesach, that is, the following year, to make up. That's the explanation for the Rashi. So it comes out that we have here a few chidushim that the Rebbe explained regarding the carbon Tamid, that on one hand, carbon Tamid has a unique time. Every day is a unique requirement to bring the carbon Tamid today. But on the other hand, by the carbon Tamid, where there is no limit of im avayemi batal karbonai, so for the chefts of the carbon or the funds from the previous day, you do bring the carbon on the next day, according to Pshuta Shel Mikra. The wine of Torah that we can take out and explain that we see here in this Rashi. Es is yidua as the ashras tashchinen mikdash vayidei b'chol ha'olam kuloi is given durach the karbonis. It's known that the Shechina that dwells in the Beis HaMikdash and by extension in the entire world comes primarily through the Aveda Karbonis. Ukemuvan is jede Sug from Karbonis verbunden mit an ander Eufen in the Ashra. So it's understood that every carbon, which has its unique content, is connected to another level of Shechina that is in the Beis HaMikdash. Leib the Gedarim mit Naim from Kol Carbon to Carbon, based on what the unique definition or whatever the carbon is about. So the same applies also regarding the karbonis that are discussed in this week's parsha. That are generally divided in two categories. Aleph, carbon tamid, was wird gebracht ständig b'chol yom v'yom. The carbon tamid that's brought constantly, daily. Beis, musfe Shabbos, v'shchaydish regalim. Zene ze verbunden mit zwei. So in other words, those are the karbonis that are brought on unique times. So these two general categories of karbanis are connected to two general ways that the Eibishter comes down and is resting in the Beis HaMikdash. The karbanis from Musafi Shabbos, V'shchaydish Regalim. Those karbanis that are you brought in unique times, Tu Noiv Da Ashras HaKedusha Was Macht Ibet Dem Zman. This is a level of the holiness that is in the Mishkan or the Beis HaMikdash that transforms the time itself. In D-Tag is Meir HaKedusha, Kedusha Shabbos, Shchedish v'Yom Tiv, Begoloi, was poilt as the Zman, Zolveren as Zman Kodesh. This is unique days that have a Kedusha, that they stand out, they're different, that it becomes a holy time. It's elevated out of the regular existence of time in the world. That's the level of Kedusha and Ashras HaShechina in connection to these karbonis. Aber the fund was the Kedusha, biyom emelo. Machte bedem zman. However, at the same time, since this kind of Kedusha that there is in these unique special days is a Kedusha that transforms the time, is verstandig as a sotag bola. That at the same time, these are a level of holiness that has a certain limitation. Was the far is the Ashra verbunden mit der Yom Mesuyim Dafke. And therefore, this is a level of holiness that's connected to only a specific day, specific time. So if it's connected to a specific time, it has to have a limitation in this Kedusha that's here in this time. By carbon tamid is fakert. However, when it comes to the carbon tamid that's brought daily, here it's the opposite. Das ist ein Ende, was ist da ständig. Tamid, onak bolis. This is a level of holiness that's constant, without any limitation. Was the fun is verstandig as the Ashra sagt durch the carbon tamid. The level of holiness that comes through the carbon tamid is verbunden mit his galus von dem Eibishten allein. It's a level of revelation of Hashem Himself. By wem es is nit shaykh kin shum shinuim chas v'shalom. By Hashem Himself, there's no levels, there's no changes. God forbid. Over Mele is this mei v'shoyde ständig b'li kolak bala, and therefore this is a level of revelation which is constant. There's no limitation to this. Und das Gufe is the time was das poilt nit as jede Tag soll werden a Yontif. This itself explains why every day, when you have this level of revelation, the revelation that's from Hashem himself, that is not prone to any changes, why the day does not become transformed into a Yom Tov. Since this is a level of holiness that's constant and comes from Hashem himself, that's not prone to any changes, is this nit in Geder von Zman. This is a level of holiness that's not at all within the definitions of existence where there's a concept of time. Not Hechav von Zman. This is a revelation that's above the constant concept of time. So therefore, this is a level of revelation that doesn't affect and reach down into the confines of time to transform and elevate the time itself. So the fact that Korban Tamid is on a regular weekday is actually a result of the fact that it's a much higher level of revelation that does not connect and relate to the existence of time. However, here we have, though, what we can see from our Rashi. When Rashi says that every day is the Moed of the Tmidim. So based on this, you would think to say, as es bleibt Heche von Zman und peilt nicht Zman. That since this is a level of revelation that originates from Hashem himself, that is not related to time, so that it remains removed from the existence of time. So here the Pasuk comes and adds and tells you, as this is nicht so. This is not the case. Nor as euch dem Korban Tamid darf man makriv sein b'moi adoi as b'chol yoim hu moed atmidim. That every day is a unique, designated time for the Korban Tamid of this day. What does this teach us regarding the revelation of that comes in the Beis HaMikdash every day? That although we're speaking of here about a level of revelation that's constant and is not possible to change at all, but this doesn't mean that this does not penetrate the existence of time. Every day is a unique time for the Korban Tamid, which means that Tag, the Zman Gufa, the day, the very time itself, wird anders mitzad dem Korban Tamid. It does become changed, it does become transformed through the Korban Tamid. Now, das hat sich nicht begillet. However, we cannot experience it and see it in an open, revealed way, the change that is happening through this level of revelation. But here, that's the Chiddush of Rashi, that even this level of a revelation that comes from Hashem himself is reaching down and penetrating the existence of time itself. Kommt eis, as in dem Inyan from Korban Tamid, wird a Chibur für Shnei Afachen. Here in the Korban Tamid, there is a combination of two opposites at the same time. Tamid versus Nitten Geder Zman. On one hand, it's Tamid, which means constant. It comes from a source of Leishanisi beyond the existence of time. And at the same time, it is designated each day in its time. Das wird nimshach in a moed uzman kavua. This does come down and does penetrate the existence of time itself. And in the Ha'ara, the Rabbi says this is similar to the concept of Makim Ma'ar and Einim in Amida, where you have the combination of two opposites. Terenyen and Avedis Adam Lakainai. To explain this idea as it applies to the serving Hashem. B'shas bei Yidin is in seiner Aveda bei Tamid. As bei ihm is nicht da kein Shinuyim b'avedasai. When a Yid serves Hashem, and he's serving Hashem with a consistency where there's no changes, there's no fluctuating in his serving of Hashem. Sabi Meisachayel, Sabi Shabbos v'Yom Tov, Biz b'Yom Kippurim, Shabbos Shabbosin, whether it's a weekday, whether Shabbos Yom Tov, even Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. In Velche, Maimud, the Matzav, Azol Non Zayin. Whatever day, whatever condition it is. Was for Aveda tut. Whatever level of serving he's serving Hashem with. Hetzav Chaim Ein Zach. The reason why, in essence, there is no change here is because the person is experiencing and sensing one and the same point. Kiyum Ratzon von Eibishim, fulfilling the will of Hashem, Sha'amarti v'naser etzayin, that Hashem commands or says, and His will is being fulfilled. That's the level of connection that is a pure connection to the essence of Hashem beyond any levels relating to this individual day. Was von Avede nimmt sich mit Zadem, was mir im Ganzen übergegeben zum Eibishim's Ratzon. So this level of serving Hashem, where one is completely and totally dedicated to the will of Hashem, by im leicht, und fehlt das, What's clear and open, what the person is experiencing is that he's connecting to Hashem himself, which is not one level or another, but beyond any levels, no changes. And therefore, as a result, when one connects on this level, there's no changes. In his Aveda, it could be a regular weekday or a Yom Kippur. He's serving Hashem with the same level of dedication. Und das ist Rashi Madgish, as durch der Aveda von Tmidim. And this is what Rashi is highlighting here. That when one serves Hashem on this level of Tmidim, consistent, Vert kol yoim amoyim. Every day becomes a unique designated time. Vert ibgemacht jede Tag seine. Every day of the person's life becomes transformed. Bis as jede Tag is an ausgeteilte Tag. Every day is a unique and special day. It's not just another weekday. It's a unique and special day for him serving Hashem. Just like Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, every day is the same unique and deep connection to the essence of Hashem to fulfill His will. Und dadurch dann wird ausgeführt die Schleimus HaKavana von es Ava Kadosh Baruch Hu Liyaslei Dire B'Tachtenim. This fulfills the purpose of creation, where Hashem's desire was to dwell in a world below, as men peiled kedusha nitnar in yamim yechadim ukvuim b'shana, to bring this level of holiness not only on unique and designated times in the year, not in jeden Tag, euch jeden wochendigen Tag, to bring the holiness of Hashem in every day, including every mundane, every weekday. Was das ist memayer, dem kiyum hayiyut von Shabbos b'chol hayomim. This will hasten the fulfillment of the promise that every day will be a Shabbos. When jeden yom ragov et zayin yom Shabbos kodesh, every regular day will be a holy day, a holy Shabbos. Yom shekulei Shabbos l'menucha l'chayei ha'elamim. The day when it will be full and total rest and peace with Hashem, the everlasting life.